What if everything you thought and believed about successful buying, selling, and financing your home was wrong? Welcome to HomeWise with Miget. This is where you can count on straightforward, objective advice on the right way to make the most out of every dollar you put into your home. Whether it's buying, selling, or financing, even maintaining and growing its value along the way. Coming to you from the News Talk STL studios at Union Station in St. Louis.
You're listening to HomeWise Radio. I'm Stal Ponticus, and I'm joined by the creator and host of the show, Michael Miget. Michael, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, Stal. How are you?
I'm doing great. Wondering why Paul Cook looks different.
Exactly. Like, what at Paul? You know,
golly, this
You're
guy
not in makeup today. So, now, if you've been paying attention, you know, I've been leaking the news, came out and said it, you know, over the weekend. We actually talked about it on last week's show.
Good.
Paul graduated out of, he has found a better deal.
Got a great new gig.
Yeah, no.
Congratulations to Paul. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd become friends. I'm very happy for him. We knew this day was coming all along. You're just never quite prepared for exactly when that happens. But wish nothing but the best for him. I'm starting to watch News Channel 5 now. I don't get up that early. I DVR it, but I'm looking for him. So
getting all your traffic info.
Let's support him and
yes, indeed,
take a look at that. But in the meantime, so Stel is going to be the new co-host producer, and outside of that, everything else is going to pretty much stay the same. So. If you're just tuning in and Paul looks different, that's because it's not Paul anymore. It's Stel. If you're on the screen, you can see his name, Ponticus. And so enough about that. Today, we are going to talk about interest rates. And I know. I always say it's not about the rate. Rate's not important. Well, I don't say the rate's not important. I just say it's not about the rate, because usually what people want to do is make it all about the interest rate, right? So when people think about a mortgage, they call me about a mortgage. Usually the first question is, what's your rate? Or, what are rates today? Or how are rates this week? Or something to do with interest rate, okay? And I know that's not just an aberration with me, because if you go into Google, if you look in some of the online resources, get into the data and stuff like that, you'll find that when it comes to mortgages, the topic of mortgages, far and away, and it isn't even close second to anything else, what people ask about are interest rates. What's the rate? What are rates last year? What are rates this year? What are rates going to do? What's the rate forecast? What rates high? I mean, it's just interest rate is like 99% the top keyword for that. So we are going to talk about rates today. So we will cover what's going on currently in the market. And actually the driving force for me wanting to talk about this are some changes that are not being driven by the market, that are coming down the pipe here in just a couple of months. So if you're out looking now, you need to be aware of this, because maybe you have a quote, maybe you don't, maybe you've talked to somebody, maybe you haven't, but what you're looking at in interest rates right now today, when somebody advertises that, they say, hey, this is what you can get if you lock in today. They're not thinking like, well, if you close 2 months down the road, what that might be. Pretty much today, when you get down to it, if you're looking and then at the point you would get a mortgage, lock it in, stuff like that, you're going to be subject to these new for the most part, they're increases that are coming down the pipe. They have nothing to do with the market. They're government driven by Fannie and Freddie, only on conventional loans. So we're going to talk about that. And then wrapped into all of that, there's a hidden danger in it all. So stay with me. We're going to jump right in right now. So rate update, the market. Still being driven by inflation. We've been talking about this story now since last fall. If you remember, last time we talked about interest rates, last fall, rates were going up. They were higher than they had been, a couple decades previous to that. And the reason for that is inflation. All right. So, inflation is the diminished buying power of money over time. Okay. So dollars today are worth more than dollars next year. When you're looking at a loan, when you're looking at buying, when you're looking at somebody paying you future interest, okay, they're going to be paying that money back with what amounts to today discounted dollars. All right. So the interest rate that somebody is going to get, which is somebody's like earnings for investing in a mortgage or loan or whatever it is we're talking about, that's where their income comes from. So they need to get a return on their money for the risk that they're taking. Part of that risk includes the interest rate market risk. Okay. And inflation is part of what drives that. So when inflation is up, rates tend to be higher because the rates have to account for that inflation over time. Okay. So inflation had been moving up last fall. We got into last fall, and as we moved into the end of the year, it started to get better. Okay. So it kind of peaked a little bit, and then it started to come down. And as soon as it started to come down and the market started to sense that the Fed would start relaxing and inflation would continue to come down, okay, that rate started to move down too. And so the trend was our friend. Okay, we got a saying in the business, the trend is a friend. It can also be the foe, which it had been up to that point. But they had started to get better, all right?
Because rates had gone up to the 8s, had they not?
For some people, yeah. For some people, they had gone up to the 8s.
So if someone came in and wanted to get an adjustable loan as opposed to a 15-year or 30-year, you were looking at different rates for those loans.
Yep.
And I would think folks would be looking at those numbers and thinking that that's not going to work in our budget. And now here we are 6 months later, and rates have come down to 6.5, somewhere in there.
They are down in, we'll just say the 6s.
Okay.
Right. So when rates are higher, that makes payments high. Everything else equal, when rates are higher, payments are higher. That drives into affordability. Okay. So what happens is if you are either constrained just because I just can't afford, I don't have enough dollars free to pay the extra for the payment driven by the interest rate. Or some people are just like, that house, I don't want it bad enough, or we don't need it bad enough or whatever to pay what in their mind is a premium for that. Because everybody's thinking back to what it was last year, like before rates went up, right? And when you're comparing it to
2.5 or 3.
Yeah, well, yeah. It's a pretty big difference.
Yes.
Right? So there's some payment shock in there. And so it had scared the buyers out of the market. Okay. And then because the buyers were coming out of the market, those people that they're not going to sell their house to move. It's usually driven by somebody's desire to buy or move. They need a house to buy, but then if they already own a house, typically they're going to sell that house. So that frees up a house for somebody else to buy. So we have experienced incredibly low inventory, meaning a relatively small number of homes for sale compared to how many buyers there are in the market, even though rates have been up and there aren't as many buyers in the market as there would be otherwise. So there is a sort of a relation. I call it musical chairs. It's kind of what it is. And, one moves so another one can move in, and then he's got to have a place to go. And it's kind of like this dance. And when markets are functioning properly, when they're functioning independently, that all works.
My wife and I kind of went through a musical chairs thing about 1.5 years ago when we sold our home, and at the same time, because we hadn't found a new home, we went ahead and leased an apartment for a year. That was our transition space until we found a new home. That worked out great, but I'm sure a lot of folks probably can't do that. It just happened to work out well for us, but we had planned ahead, figuring if our home sells here within the next month or so, which it did, this would have been August, a year ago, August. And the lease that we had for the apartment downtown was through April. So that that transition phase that we had there allowed us enough time to find the right home that we wanted to get out in Washington, Missouri.
Right.
And the home finally opened up. We were able to finish the transaction for purchasing the home. Everything worked out okay, but it was interesting. Like you said, it's like musical chairs.
Yeah.
It was 6 months of musical chairs trying to figure out where are we going to go, what are we going to do.
Yep. And fortunately, you were in a position where you had the flexibility or you had the ability to navigate that.
Yes.
Right. So,
and we were downsizing.
Yeah. Well, and that's why. So I'm assuming no kids.
Correct.
To worry about that. So you weren't dealing with a large number of people.
Yes.
School districts and, timing and, and things like that.
Yeah. Everything that families have to deal with every day. You're right.
So yeah, I like to say when you have the ability to be more flexible and you don't have to try and ram something into a small space, sell and then buy at the same time, and it has to work out.
That's tough.
It has to be orchestrated.
Yeah. It's
more difficult than if you have the ability to be flexible like you did, so that in case something, like you said, we put it up for sale. We didn't know if it was, maybe we didn't know it was going to sell right away. It happened to sell right away. We hadn't found anything else in the meantime. You were flexible enough to not have to say, oh, we got to find something like right now.
Yeah.
Which meant that you might not get exactly what you want, or you might not even get even remotely what you want. Mm-hmm. And you're probably going to overpay for it because you don't have time to be
selective.
Patient. It's selective. Right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And that is, everybody's circumstances are different. And so that's where, we talk a lot and we ask a lot of questions here. That's kind of a mantra of the show. We talk about using professionals, people that have experience, that know what they're doing. So the lending side, mine, or we don't have any guests on today, but our realtor guests that come on work through that stuff with you. Okay. And so, but yeah, depending on like if you had sold and then tried to buy a year ago, 2 years ago versus now versus next year, and see next year's big question mark because we don't know what it's going to be because it hasn't happened yet. Now we have expectations, what we think might happen. And a lot of times, and that's actually part of what I want to get into today, not to give away the mystery too much, but that hidden danger in some of this is when somebody that's in my position speaks with the person listening thinks that their person they're working with is speaking with certainty, and I hear it a lot. Hey, you know what? Don't worry about it today. Just get into the house, get the right one, and then we'll refinance you later on when rates go down. Like, well, what if they don't go down? Mm-hmm. Well, of course, at some point they're going to go down. Look where they were. Well, they shouldn't have been where they were. They're only where they were because of what happened. And trust me, you don't want that to happen again, to try and get rates back down, because it doesn't quite work that way. There's a lot more moving parts to it than that, but it would take some very bad things to get rates back down that that low again. So we don't want that, but just the main point with that is you just have to be careful because we don't know exactly what's going to happen later on. And so you need to be okay with what you're doing today. So like I said, you had flexibility in that, and that's great. That makes an easier job on you, but on us, it makes it easier on you. It gets you a better deal. But even if you don't have that flexibility, it doesn't mean that it can't happen. And also, earlier, I said you would be paying more, and that I don't mean that with certainty. Now that I brought that into the conversation, you're more likely to pay more when we look at people doing that as a whole. Okay. But it doesn't necessarily mean that in whoever's particular instance we're talking about, that it would equal paying more. But it does pose an issue or something to look at and deal with. And for that, you want a seasoned professional, somebody that's done it before, somebody that knows what they're doing, how it works. And, I like to say you don't want to be somebody's test case or somebody's first deal.
Someone who can figure out the math to make sure that everything comes out correctly, and that would be you.
Right. That is correct. So the point with this inflation thing is that we're not out of the woods yet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So remember, we had the pandemic, we had the Fed intervention, flood the economy with money, and then now we're in the aftermath of that still. Okay. And we're going to be in it for a while. So, the Fed's been hiking rates to try and get inflation under control. They thought that they had gotten on it. Then they started to back off on the hikes in January. Rates had already been coming down a little bit. When that happened, they continued to come down, and they were coming down, and the trend was our friend. Okay. But this last round, inflation, we got some surprise numbers, and it came in a little hotter than expected. And sometimes, because remember, this is all forward looking, and it's they're trying to see where things are going to go because interest rates are forward looking, because you're going to take out a loan today with an interest rate today, but you're going to be paying on it into the future. So they're always forward looking. And when that trend gets broken, right? So they had expected it to come down and keep going lower and lower and lower, but it ticks up a notch. So it isn't even back to where it was last fall that drove rates back up, but it broke the trend. And so what happens is rates react to that, and it's like a rubber band, a slingshot. It kind of, it was bending down. Now it's going back the other direction. They're up almost as high as they were last fall. Not all the way, but they're definitely higher than they were a month or so ago. It's basically been the whole month of February. This has been going on. So,
and we hear from the Treasury Department that they would love to get it down to 2 to 3%, and that's still a ways away from where it is now.
Yep, and that's actually my next point. You must be reading my mind over there. I love this. This is great. It makes my job easy. When I don't, it's easier to answer you than it is to come up with all this on my own.
Because I look at what Jerome Powell and Janet Yellen are doing, and I have to be honest with you, and you're much more knowledgeable in this whole area, but I sit back and wonder if they're just kind of throwing darts at the wall or if they actually really have a plan. I would love to sit down with them, especially Janet Yellen, and have her say, okay, show me your work. Like my math teacher used to ask in high school.
Exactly.
Show me where you're going with this, because I'm not sure that I see this when we have $31 trillion in debt. And like you said, the government is printing money left and right. And so now we're in a situation where it would be great if it would come back down to 2 to 3%. It would make it so much better for you. But boy, it looks as though that may still be a ways down the road.
Yeah, and that is that. So the 2 to 3% you're referring to is the year-over-year inflation rate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so their target is generally 2%. And actually, this is probably a good point to
take a break,
because we're up against a hard stop here. Why don't we do that, and then we will open this can of worms when we come back in segment 2.
Okay, we'll be right back. You're listening to HomeWise Radio with Michael Miget. Stay right there. We'll be back. Welcome back to HomeWise Radio. I'm Stal Ponticus, and the creator and host of the show, Michael Miget, is here. Michael, we were talking about the inflation issue. Please continue, my friend.
I will. Thanks, Stal. I almost called you Paul there.
That's okay. I love Paul. You know what, Paul?
I'm not looking at,
Paul and I have been friends. We worked together for years at Y98. So he's almost like my little brother, especially since I grew up an only child. So, Paul's younger than I am, but we spent so many years together at Y98. So I certainly don't mind you calling me Paul.
I said almost, because I was just like, you get like muscle memory.
Yeah.
Brain memory, muscle memory. Okay.
I know he's shorter than I am.
Right, yeah. And definitely that. So I got some cameras set up here to work on also. But let's jump back into, we were talking about the Fed interest rates, the 2 to 3% target. That's the inflation rate year over year. That's where they want to get it down to. But we're up around, and I mean, it depends. You'll hear a lot of numbers thrown around. And so, depending on what you're looking at, let's just call it like 5 or 6%.
And as we're recording this at the beginning of March,
yeah,
those would be the numbers that you're using.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're about double, close to double where they want them to. Okay. Pretty much their only tool they got in the tool shed is messing with the federal overnight funds rate. Okay. So that's the interest rate that banks get charged when they borrow money overnight to settle their accounts. Right. And so I won't promise no tangent on the banking system and how that works, because we'll still be here next week.
But that's all stuff that the Treasury does
with no breaks. Yeah, that's what they're doing.
Yes.
Okay. So by dialing that interest rate up, their member banks pay more for money when they do that hardcore, like technical lending that makes the banking system work, so that when you go to the bank, you write a check, you go to the bank to get your money out, like it's there, even though, like we talked about this last week, it's not really there, right? Like the money, like you put $100 in the bank and like they didn't take it back into a vault and put it into a box with your name on it. They keep track of it, but it works a little different than that. So by making that rate go up, banks get charged more. And so then that has a trickle down effect, with their overall effect trying to slow down economic activity. All right. And that is starting to happen. So the economy is starting to slow, and that's what they want. Right. And then at the same time, everybody else is like trying to speed it up, so there is some conflicts between monetary policy and political policy taking place right now. We're not going to get into the politics of that, because, again, we will be here until next week talking about that with no breaks, and still not even hardly put a dent in it. But just what you need to know is that they're still hiking. They had been hiking, but they had backed off on the size of the hikes in January. It looked like they had been telegraphing they were going to continue that into this summer. But now with this last batch of data that came out, it looks like their danger is now that they're going to go back to the increased hikes. That's what created the spike up in interest rates. We've been dealing with it all of February. And it's been a thing where, see, somebody in my position, we make loans. When we make loans, we're dealing with interest rates. At some point, we have to do what's called locking in the rate. That's where we commit, all right? Commit to a price, you get a rate, you get a cost for that rate, and there is actually it's tied to a transaction that's in the market. Again, more complicated than what I'm making it, but just that's how it works. So part of my job is watching the market, because I need to know, what is the market doing? Because I'm trying to look at it. If I have people that I know are out shopping or looking around and might be calling me, hey, okay, we're ready to go. We found the house, let's lock in. I need to know, is today a good day to lock or not? Is this morning a good time to lock or not? What does it look like this afternoon? What does it look like tomorrow? What is it going to look like next week? What's going on? I mean, there's a lot of things going on. So I've got the ticker on my computer screen in front of me, and the amount of fluctuations and ultimately distortions that you see are just mind-blowing. Like stuff like it used to take, we'll see rates move in one day what it might have taken months to happen during such a at a less
more normal time.
Yeah, more normal time.
Yeah.
And it has to do with the distortions and all the fluctuations that occurred with what happened during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So they pumped a record amount of money into the economy. That money has not come out yet, because they haven't even begun the pull money out, right? So they pumped it all in. They haven't even started to take it out. All they're trying to do now is just increase the price of what's sloshing around in there right now. And that's like driving markets crazy. So never mind, like we're not even talked about the opposite of QE or quantitative easing when we're going to shrink that balance sheet down. It just means that, and this builds on what I had said earlier about counting on rates going down at some point in the near future. Why? Because they have been lower. Oh, that they were up this year. They must be down next year, the year after that. When they come back down, it's like sometimes we think they're going to come down. If you would have asked me a month ago, I would have said, yeah, it looks like I could see a pathway to where they would be where we would like them to be next year, maybe later this year. Now I'm looking at it saying just the opposite. I'm back to where I was last fall, which is, and you alluded to this earlier, is we had no idea when it's going to go back down because it's not having, what the Fed does is it has a delayed action. So they raise rates and then the market reacts to that. But that's their goal it's not just to get rates up. Their goal is to slow economic activity. Well, that happens afterwards because economic activity is driven by capital investment. Capital has, when they're affecting interest rates, they're affecting the cost of capital. And so this is the real nerd stuff.
But you have to explain it so that folks understand. You're right.
Right.
Because you have a buyer come in and a family is looking at maybe a $400,000 house, and you're trying to figure out the numbers, and they're looking at their budget and figuring, well, if this is $1,800 a month or $2,200 a month, and then all of a sudden the rates start changing, the rates go up on your end, and you realize you have to tell them, no, it's going to be more like $2,200 to $2,500. So they have to back off and say, well, then I guess we have to go for a home that's more in the $350,000 range or $325,000. Right, so you guys are trying to adjust on your end, and a buyer's trying to figure out how much do I have to adjust.
Yep. So if that is, and that it's actually a great scenario because you have to be okay paying the premium, and if you're not, then you have to back off on the price of what you can buy. So now, if you're the seller and you're selling your house, okay, well, did I just lose am I going to drop the price to try and still sell to this same person who was interested in my home?
Exactly. Or do I leave it?
Or do I go try and find another one?
Exactly.
And
yes.
that is right. So that's that is what happens in a normal market. Now, we're not in a normal market on a lot of different counts. Part of that is low inventory. So there aren't a lot of houses. So today, a seller is more likely to let that buyer walk than they might be during another more normal time because there are so few houses. Well, if you okay, I get it. You don't want to do this anymore, can't do this anymore, whatever. I'll just go find another buyer because they're not lined up like they used to be, but I know that there aren't a lot of houses out there for sale. And so that's where knowing what the market is doing. And if you're, am I the only house in the subdivision for sale, or am I one of five? And some subdivisions are like that. It just depends on what's going on. So there's a lot of it has to do with timing. So you hear me on here harping about HomeBot a lot, knowing what your home value is, right? HomeWiseRadio.com. You can go there. There's a card. It says HomeBot, find out your home value, click it. Put your address in, and it'll pull it up right there on the screen for you, right? And then if you want to know more, then you can enter your email address, and it'll send you an email with what's called a digest, where it gives you the home value that you just saw, but also gives you a historical account of what that has done over time. So am I trending up? Am I trending down? Am I trending flat? Am I consistent? What else is selling around me? And that's an indication of what else might be selling or not selling around you, so that you know kind of where you stand on that front. And then it also tracks the loan information, the amortization for that. It'll calculate your equity and do a whole lot of other good things for you. It's like I call it a monthly statement for your home value and your home. Okay, it's like you get a monthly statement for your bank accounts, for your 401k, investment accounts, things like that. People look at them every month, but they don't have a sense of really data-based, factual basis for what their home value is. And home values will tend to fluctuate just like the account balances because they're a function of what's selling around you. So they're selling, are there sales, are there not sales, are they up, are they down? And that oscillates over time. So HomeBot will capture that. It's nice to see. It's nice to know where you're at. It's can give peace of mind, or it can help make decisions that where that information should be taken into consideration. So go check that out. But getting back to the main point, what does all this mean? Don't count on rates going down just because you need them to go down. All right. So we've talked about buy downs before on the show. Okay. Both temporary and permanent ones. It's been a while, but I want to bring this back up again because, and we're always looking at the data, seeing what people are doing out there. There's a lot of buy downs happening. Okay. And they're primarily the temporary type, the temporary buy downs. Okay. So that's where the seller is giving you a seller concession at closing. It's a chunk of money. And the difference is when you're doing a temporary buy down, that money is specifically earmarked to subsidize future payments on the loan for 1 year, 2 years, or up to 3 years, depending on what type of buy down that you do. Now, that amount of money that needs to be set aside is calculated using a reduced interest rate on the loan by either 1%, 2%, or 3%, depending on whether you do the 1 year version, the 2 year version, or the 3 year version. Now, it's being tied to interest rate, that's where it stops. Okay, it's just used as a marker to make a calculation so that they know how much to set aside to put into, I call it a slush fund, so that each month when you make a payment, you make a reduced payment, and then there's an amount of money pulled out of the slush fund, the subsidy, that gets, just think of it as getting added to your payment to make up for the full payment of what the payment should be and what that payment is going to be moving forward on the loan once that temporary buy down period goes away. All right. But there's no financial leverage associated with it, meaning it doesn't save you any interest. And in fact, it might even cost you interest because you are, if you didn't do the buy down, presumably then you would have just taken that money and not taken out as big a loan because you were paying less for the house. So that does hit that calculation somewhere. And that's the analysis that I can guarantee almost never gets done. I do it all the time because when I do this and I'm crunching the numbers, I'm doing the analysis, I want to make sure that you're getting the right thing. But there's a lot of temporary buy downs being done, and I can hear, because I see it online on blogs, on things like that. Oh, we did this thing where, we got this, our mortgage guy, he got us this reduced interest rate. It's great. He's like the greatest thing. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then, but it's okay because next year when rates go down, we're just going to refinance into a new loan and then we'll get that lower rate. And we sidestep this whole thing. And I'm like, I hope that's what happens. I know they're not hoping because the way they're talking with certainty. And it doesn't sound to me like anybody ever had the conversation like, hey, you know what? We would like to do this. If this happens, you're able to do this. I'll even do it for you. I'll do a free refinance. I'll give you a discounted price on that. I mean, there's a lot of that stuff floating around right now, which if you lend at inflated rates and you don't have the best deal out there, you got to use something to get them in the door, right? I mean, I don't do that because you get my best deal coming out of the gate, and that's just how I operate. All right, so you don't have to. You can low stress, and almost in every situation that I get involved in, I am, let's just say, competitive, if not the leader for that. So I just find it's just best to come out with your best deal on that. But I look at doing buy downs, and I've done some, but you got to make sure that you're doing it the right way. So why don't we carry on with this thought when we come back after the break, and we'll open this can of worms.
We'll do that. You're listening to HomeWise Radio. the creator and host of the program, Michael Miget, right there. I'm Stal Ponticus. We will be back right after this break. Welcome back to HomeWise Radio. I'm Stal Ponticus, joined by the creator and host of the show, Michael Miget. Let's get back into the weeds of trying to figure out exactly what's going on in the home market and in the loan market. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, we did trounce through the weeds a little bit today. Not too bad, too bad. We've certainly done worse. I've done worse before, but I've been like, Mike, just stay on track. Otherwise, you'll never get through this stuff. So, but
it's important information. Folks need to understand.
It is. And it's, you hear me talk a lot about not shortcutting things, right? Because people are like, no, just bottom line it for me. I'm like, I'm doing the best I can, but at the same time, I don't want to shortchange you. So to oversimplify something, to give you the illusion that it was simpler than it really is. Not that you have to get off, you don't need to know every single dial that I'm turning or looking at or all that, but there is more than sometimes bottom lining it is a paragraph and not a sentence, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit more than that. And I just find, borrowers that do better, owners that do better over time are the ones that want to know what's going on. And it's okay to ask. And I know that in the past, you might have asked those questions and gotten a blank stare or, well, you don't, what amounts to you don't need to know that. Because I get a lot when I start talking about this, I've gotten comments about like, oh, I never knew that. Like, how did you, like, this is your third home or this is your eighth loan. Like, how did you not know how this worked? Like, no one's ever told it, never told us, never heard that before. They've never heard it before. Blows my mind. Just how in the world, but people don't know any better. They just go with what they're being told. And if they have trust in the person and, you don't have to know every little thing in order for somebody else to do a good job for you, but you don't have the basis to know if somebody's doing a good job for you, really, unless you sort of know what it is they're supposed to be doing. And so I just find that it helps to explain and say what's going on. It puts people's minds at rest, and there's enough stress in this outside of you also having the stress of, I don't know what's going on. Like, I'm just, hey, what'd you guys tell you? Well, he didn't tell me anything. Well, what are you doing? Well, I'm waiting. Waiting for what? I don't know. I'm waiting for him to get back to you. Like, well, I called him, left him, like that kind of stuff. And that just creates anxiety and things that don't need to be there. So this is my attempt at not putting you or other people in that, in that situation.
And you're dealing with folks who are in the midst of buying and selling, the stress of moving. And on top of that, for instance, in our case, we hadn't moved in 35 years. So things were different last year.
Oh, yeah.
As in relationship to where it was 35 years ago when we purchased the home that we were selling.
Well, yeah. And if you had moved even as soon as like 5 years ago,
the
process is different because things have just, in our technologically based society, things have changed.
Yep.
Things happen faster.
It was a big learning curve for us.
Yeah.
So I totally understand what you're saying, and you've got to do your best to try to inform the buyer and the seller, hey, this is what we're dealing with. Yeah.
And they just know, they just have a better experience. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what I'm trying to do for people.
Mm-hmm.
Give them that experience, so they have the trust and they do better with that. So that's the perspective that I'm coming from. So when I talk about a topic like, in this case, the temporary buy downs, I hear things that people say, and I wonder, like, what about, what happens if, and then fill in the blank with whatever it is I think that they might not be thinking about. When you hear prospective borrowers or people that are looking at buying homes or people that just bought homes or people that just took out loans and they're saying something like that, I'm like, oh, you know what? You're missing part of the story here, like an important part. So, yeah, if your strategy is we're going to refinance when rates go down and they're supposed to go down next year, like, well, they're not supposed to they're going to do whatever they're going to do. And I believe that they might go down next year. I believe that less today than I did a month ago. But a month ago, I believed it more than I had 2 months before that, because we're always looking at the data, and the data is trailing. And then we're taking that trailing data, looking in the rearview mirror, and then trying to look upstream here and figure out, or up the road and figure out where the potholes are. We can't see them. Like they haven't materialized yet. And oftentimes they may not materialize until like when you're right on top of them. So if you missed one, it's not because I knew it was there and it just happened to not be in our path. It was a near miss. I don't want to take credit. Don't take credit for that. I mean, now,
how many years have you been doing
31.
31 years.
31 years.
So you've
I've
seen
it all.
Big changes. Yeah.
There's nothing I haven't seen. There's no situation I haven't been in. I tell people just, like I'm the guy you tell everything to. I will pick and choose what's important, what's not important. If it needs to be, like put together in such a way to give an accurate portrayal of what your situation or scenario is to an underwriter so they can make a prudent and reasonable underwriting decision, that's my job. That's what I do. So we don't commit loan fraud. We don't make anything up. We don't create stories out of thin air. But sometimes you can talk to somebody and you can pick the story out of it, like, well, tell me what's going on with that job history. Well, what happened over here with this bill? Like, tell me what's going on. And then sometimes you got to fish it out of them, because there's some detail in there that would be useful to an underwriter in them being able to form a basis of saying yes to this person. But the borrower didn't know that mattered because it's not always common sense on what we're looking at. So part of it is knowing what CNS keeps coming back to questions. It's always coming back to questions and where we're trying to get with that. So asking the right question to know what the thing was so that I can put it in its proper light so that we can talk about it.
As you're trying to put the numbers together, how important is a credit rating for someone? For instance, if
immensely important.
If they come in and you're seeing 675 as opposed to 810, I'm sure you're immediately thinking, well, now we've got some issues here.
Yeah,
we need
there
to
is going to be right. So we don't do like good credit, bad credit anymore because it's all shades of gray. Okay, 800 is going to be towards the upper end. And I don't see too many 800s. So if you don't have an 800, don't sweat it. You could have perfect credit. I have perfect credit. I've never missed a payment in my life. I have had a long credit history. I've never missed a single payment. I've never been anywhere near 800. Like I can't break 740-ish for some reason. Now that's still very good. But people hear that and like, oh, that's like not 800. That's closer to 700 than 800. And now they're thinking 800. Well, when you get down into the lower 700s, so 740, 720, 700, there start to be differences. Okay. And then when you get into under 700, you can have a 675 and you can still have a great credit history. But a credit score is a factor of more than just what your credit history was.
And that's what you're trying to piece together, investigate that, find out why those numbers are there, and just say, okay, here's what we need to do.
Yeah, and so part of the loan underwriting is pulling a credit report, and then a part of that credit report, we get a credit score with it. We pull a report from all three bureaus, so we get 3 scores for each borrower. So if there's 2 borrowers, that's 6 scores. 2 from, Experian?
Equifax.
2 from Equifax, and then 2 from TransUnion.
Okay.
And then you take the middle score of each borrower, and then it's the lower of that. But there are some caveats to that now, okay? And again, to get into that right now.
I didn't mean to digress.
No, you're right. But generally speaking, what I just said, that is how it works. But credit is only about a third of the equation, because you've also got how much you're putting down, or what percentage of the home or the purchase price you're financing. So 5%, 10%, 20%, those types of things. And then you also have what are called income ratios, where they compare the amount of payments you have to the amount of income you have, create a factor or percentage or a figure out of that, and then that gets factored into the decision. And if that factor is too high, meaning you have too many payments compared to your amount of your verifiable income, you might get declined because of that. So if you're beyond, this isn't the exact figure, but if you're spending half of your gross income on monthly outgoing bills, which nobody gets gross, we get net, right? Because there's taxes withheld. So even if you're in a 0% tax bracket, there's employment taxes. If you're an employee, so like your FICA, like your Medicare, your Social Security, stuff like that, nobody gets gross, people get net. And then you have more expenses than just what show up in your credit report. Because food doesn't show up in there, utilities doesn't usually show up in there, health and, other things that you might be, like you go to the, you want to buy a soda out of the vending machine. Well, that doesn't show up in your credit report, but it still takes money out of your pocket that you could spend. So there is a lot, there's a lot that goes into it, but it's very standardized. So like I do all my work in a computer, I just call it the system. So when people are talking to me, I say, let me put that in the system and see. I just let it crunch the numbers, and then it tells me where it is. And then if there's an issue, then I know where to go look or what. Then I'll start to peel it apart, take it apart, and see where we're at. And sometimes situations are very simple and straightforward, and sometimes they're not. And it doesn't mean one is worse or better than the other. It's just some situations are more complicated than others. Might have multiple jobs with short times with varying pieces. And then, there's a lot to keep track of there. Okay. But it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is a poor borrower because of that. Just documentation wise.
A lot of expenses. You've got more kids you're taking care of. Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes, and even with certain kinds of loans, that disposable income becomes a factor that gets worked in. But point being, and it's actually like a perfect to weave all of that together, is knowing what your payments are going to be, that you're going to be able to have the wherewithal to make those comfortably moving forward when you take out a loan, when you buy a home, and that. And so if you're counting on that temporary buy down giving you payment relief that you need in order for that payment to be comfortable with the plan that you're going to refinance out of it, I'm right there. I'm hoping, I'm praying right along with you, because I don't wish ill will on anybody. But what are you going to do if that doesn't happen? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it reminds me a lot of, I said I've been around 31 years. The Great Recession, right? So in the mid-2000s.
The 07-08 recession?
Yep, 07-08
okay.
Into 09 and 010, had the subprime mortgages. A lot of those were short-term ARMs, right? 2-year ARMs and 3-year ARMs. And the idea was that, and they were given to people with less than perfect credit. All right, 'cause that's what it was called back then. And here, take this 2-year ARM, we'll get you a better rate than if we got you a 30-year fixed, right? And so you're not like paying the brunt of that, what that credit is doing to your rate today. Now you got 2 years to fix your credit, and then after you fix that, we'll just refinance you in 2 years, no problem. Okay. Well, that's a great plan. And it's not a perfect comparable to what's happening right now, because that wasn't market driven. That was driven by something that they had to wherewithal to do. But it turns out that a lot of people don't get their credit issues resolved in 2 years. Some of them, the ones that are actually trying, sometimes it takes longer than that. But then some just don't even try. They hear here's what I can get now. It's not what I want, but I can get the loan I want in 2 years. All I got to do is wait. I can do that. I can wait. Like I don't have a choice. I can wait. And so they wait, and they show up 2 years. Okay, I'm ready. Well, you didn't do anything. So I mean, it's having a plan. It's having a strategy. Hoping rates go down is not a good strategy.
From my perspective, the critical side note there would be, do those folks understand that when you're refinancing, you've got additional costs again that you're going to have to pay?
You do.
Correct?
You do.
So that money has to come from somewhere when you're refinancing, and you've got all these costs essentially similar to what you had when you took out the original loan. Now you've got another batch of.
It does. And if you're doing this right, if you're doing it responsibly, a part of the analysis that should be done prior to doing something like this, so that you know what you're getting into, would take into account, okay, when you are looking at refinancing in the future, let's account for the modest amount of closing costs that are going to be incurred to do that, because you would want to factor that into, because you're always comparing it to, okay, so if you're looking at doing a buy down today, okay, well, am I looking at doing a buy down, or you're looking at doing something else? Because you have to do something, right? So you're comparing one thing to another. So when if you're going to do an analysis where you're comparing the two to each other, you need to factor in the cost of that refinance to the temporary buy down if you're going to do this apples to apples, to compare it to the other thing, to see which one, which way they're better off. And usually they're comparing it to a permanent buy down. So a permanent buy down is where, instead of creating a slush fund, you put it into you put the money towards purchasing a lower rate that is permanent. It stays with the loan. So typically it won't generate as large a payment reduction, but that payment reduction is not temporary. So it's something you can count on, okay? And even with that, and that sounds like, oh, well, that's the perfect fix. Well, it might be the perfect fix. It just depends on what your situation is. So that's where, again, goes back to having that professional.
That's where you come in. That's where you come in.
This is what I do every day,
yeah.
Right? So if you're looking to buy, if you're looking to sell, if you're in the middle of it at some point, and you have talked to somebody, haven't talked to somebody, want a second opinion, need to get a first opinion, I've said something that made you think like, oh, you never thought of that. Maybe we should look into that. Just give me a call. All right, 314-275-0314. My mortgage website's GoShelter.com. That phone number and my email address is on there, so GoShelter.com. And you can also reach me through the show website, which is HomeWiseRadio.com.
Excellent. Thanks for all the information, Michael.
Thanks, Stell, for standing in to be my trusted cohort, my co-host, my producer, the guy that keeps me. I think we almost kept it within the rails today.
I hope so. I hope we did. So,
I was trying really hard. This is better than I have ever done for that. So I will get better on that. Thanks as time goes on. But I'm appreciative that you're here. I'm glad you wanted to do this adventure with me, and I'm excited to see where it's going to take us.
Thanks for sharing your wisdom with us.
All right.
It's great. You've been listening to HomeWise Radio. I'm Stal Ponticus. That's the creator and host of the show, Michael Miget. I hope this show was a real learning experience for you as you were listening, and join us again next weekend. We'll do it with even more information for you. So thanks for listening.
And some fun.
Yes.
Loans and loan information provided by Shelter Mortgage, Inc. Visit us at GoShelter.com and MLS number 192609. A Missouri residential mortgage licensee and equal housing lender. Call 888-497-2558 for additional cost information. Other restrictions may apply.